We're coming up on 6:36 here on Sky 99.5 FM, going through some of the stories that are trending this morning. One story that will continue, I think, to generate some discussion has to do with what's happening with the judiciary, and particularly the news at the end of last week that two members of the JLSC retendered their resignations. They did it last month, but we were only informed about it over the weekend. And the Chief Justice says, "Well, I'm not leaving." That was the big headline on the front page of the Guardian yesterday. And also, we have information coming out of President's House that they've already begun an active search for replacements for retired Justices Stallmeyer and Hamill-Smith. On the line with us now, Martin George, attorney at law and member of the Police Service Commission. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, Jessamine.
Good morning,
Edison, and good morning to your listeners.
Martin George, what's really taking place in the judiciary these days? It's a little confusing. It seems as though everything is breaking down and no one wants to take responsibility for anything.
Well, Jesse, you recall several months ago when we first started talking about this issue on your program. One of the things I said is that there's no easy end to this. And in fact, I said what people may think might have been the end was really just the beginning, because as I said, the imbroglio only gets worse and worse as this crisis deepens, because what we have now here, upon the resignation of these two members, of course the pressure has intensified and the situation has gotten even more dire, because you have a scenario where two persons who may have been able to shed some light on what actually transpired and how things actually played themselves out are no longer within the ambit or the jurisdiction of the Judicial and Legal Service Commission. So the question arises, okay, in light of the threatened court action, which I think Ms. Ayers Caesar, through her attorney, Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maraj, has indicated they will be proceeding with, or they intend to proceed with. How do you then get or compel these two goodly gentlemen to now come as witnesses to say, well, what exactly transpired? Because as far as they are concerned, well, listen, I am no longer within the ambit of the JLSC. I have now tendered my resignation, so you can't compel me to come forth and give evidence. So it now makes it even worse in terms of the remaining members, the pressure on the remaining members. I mean, unfortunately, for Ms. Manchuk, she has no choice in the matter, because by law, once you are chairman of the Public Service Commission, automatically you are a member of the JLSC. So she is, she's impaled on the horns of a dilemma there, in that she's put there, she's thrust into this position by legislative, dictates. And then, of course, you have Mr. Ernest Coiler, senior counsel, who has only recently come on, so therefore he may not be able to speak to things that transpired prior to, this whole, catastrophe unfolding. So therefore, you left basically with the Chief Justice being the only person in the JLSC who can speak to what exactly transpired, if it is that you're talking about matters eventually being litigated and, evidence having to be given and affidavits having to be sworn, that kind of thing, because the members are the ones who will ultimately have to give an account. So, I mean, Jesse, I tell you, this thing is not going to end easily, and it's not going to end well, because, can you imagine the scenario of, again, having our Chief Justice being put in the witness box, having to be cross-examined, and, if you look at it, the history of Trinidad and Tobago, we're now reaching to a stage where for the last, I think, 3 or 4, where you have had Chief Justices each one has ended up in some sort of litigation. You had litigation with former Chief Justice De La Bastide. He ended up before the courts. You had Mr. Bernard. He ended up before the courts. You had Mr. Sharma. In fact, he ended up before the courts on a criminal charge. So I mean, this thing is not. It's not all going well for confidence in the judiciary. And I think at some point we have to reach a stage where people are willing to put aside personal egos and, your own considerations, and we have to think in terms of what's the greater good for the country. I saw the Prime Minister, after he returned from Grenada, is hinting that, well, look, the government may have to, approach Parliament to, seek some kind of intervention. And I think it's really, really heading that way and reaching to that, because you cannot have an institution that continues to basically crumble upon itself from within. And, when you have a scenario of, persons digging their heels in, and saying, well, basically, you do what you want, I'm not moving, I'm not doing anything, that kind of thing. I saw Mr. Martin Daly repeated his call. He dug his heels in on his position, and he repeated his call, calling upon the Chief Justice to do the honorable thing. And, well, of course, we know the response from the Chief Justice.
It's not going to happen at all, apparently.
Right, yeah, that was his position. So I'm not sure that as a nation, we ought to allow this scenario to continue for much longer.
Well, Mr. George, because of all these controversies surrounding the JLSC, do you think, you said they are searching for new members and so on, that people will be reluctant to serve on a jail as a board member, as the case might be, and how long can this go on?
Well, obviously they would be reluctant to serve, and quite frankly, I am not sure that the solution to the present crisis is to rush and, just pull two persons and, thrust them onto the JLSC and say, well, that fixes the problem, because it does not. I think we really need to take a mature, rational look at the extent of the crisis, and we really need to find deeper solutions than that. Putting on two new people will not solve the situation of what is the current embarrassing scenario of 53 cases that are in limbo. Nobody knows where to go with them. Nobody knows what to do. You've had denials coming from can you believe that you had a scenario where the office of the judiciary is then saying, well, look, that press release we sent out, their own press release was badly worded or unfortunately worded. So what it appeared to say is not what we meant to. Come on, where does this end?
But this is what I mean. How long can this situation?
And in the meantime, real people with real lives are having their lives held in limbo and being destroyed, because these people at the top, who are supposed to be exemplars in the society, cannot get their act together.
That's right. And it really is unfair. And I am telling you, Jesse, you are soon going to start to see litigation coming from the 53 persons who are going to say, hey, listen, this is something that is now in breach of my constitutional rights, because you are telling me you have me imprisoned, for persons who are imprisoned, you have me imprisoned, and you cannot tell me what you are doing with my case. My case is parted, it's now in limbo, it's stuck, and you cannot say yea or nay. The deputy chief magistrate she has Hobson's choice before her as to, does she start the cases over? Does she say, well, look, I am not doing it? Then you had something where I think she said, well, she had gotten instructions or a directive. My goodness, how do we get out of this bottomless pit, this quagmire that we end up in this scenario, if it is that persons are not ultimately going to stand up and man up and take responsibility for, this utter disaster that has occurred. And therein lies the problem.
We have people like Israel Khan making the call again to perhaps begin impeachment proceedings against the Chief Justice. But, those are a specific set of circumstances, aren't they?
That's right. That's right. Those are very, very specific circumstances. And actually, I am not sure that we are necessarily at the point at all where we can use the constitutional parameters to begin such proceedings. So I would not suggest that. I think, if you look at the British tradition, you saw, a prime minister lose a vote on Brexit.
Yes.
And based on that alone, that was not a referendum necessarily on his term in office or anything of the sort. He could have simply said, well, look, okay, that's just one issue. I'm continuing as normal. No, he said, listen, as a matter of principle, if my people are not supporting me on this issue, which I consider so important, I am doing the honorable thing and stepping down. We don't have that tradition here in Trinidad and Tobago. Our tradition has been the opposite.
So, Martin George, is there any kind of legal bypass surgery that can be used to soothe or heal this problem?
Well, the thing is, you see, the point is that you have legal options, but of course, at the end of the day, what is required is the moral imperative. In other words, there must come a point in time where you say, look, this is the right and proper thing to do for the sake of the country, for the sake of the dignity of the office. And these are things that you could never legislate. You could never legislate for morals.
Yes.
You could never legislate for morality. You could try to put certain guidelines and rules and regulations in place, but you cannot legislate for everything when it comes to a moral situation. So that's where we are at. And I think that civil society has to start speaking out and, start to let its voice be heard on this, because this is truly a crisis. Persons may feel, well, I don't have anyone among the 53 persons who, are caught by this, so therefore it doesn't affect me. But it actually affects the entire judicial system. It affects the confidence of the nation in the judiciary, and it continues to erode with each passing day that this standoff continues. And it cannot be allowed to continue forever.
We have the Prime Minister saying that there may very well be a parliamentary prescription to deal with this particular issue. And this is a point that former Justice Minister and High Court Judge Herbert Volney has been making. He's been saying Parliament will have to deal with this, would have to sort this matter out. They are basically the highest court in the land. And they would be the ones to have to deal with this. But what exactly can Parliament do?
Well, that's the question that I was wondering. And to be fair to the Prime Minister, I'm not sure he said a parliamentary prescription, but he said Parliament may have to seek to intervene. But I'm not even sure how that intervention will take place and what would be the effect of it, in the sense that you have the doctrine of separation of powers, which clearly indicates that, look, you must respect the separate jurisdictions of the three arms of the executive, the judiciary, the legislature, so therefore each one has to respect the other in terms of its turf and jurisdiction. So I wait to see how this is going to be played out in the Parliament in terms of them seeking to have some intervention. I mean, of course, they could always express their, dissatisfaction, disappointment, with the way things are going. But I'm curious to see beyond that what sort of coercive power or legislative effect they can bring to bear on this situation to say, well, look, we are making some definitive change to it.
If the CJ were to resign, how long would the process take for a JLSE to be reconstituted up and running?
Well, it would depend on how long remember, okay, so you would have two aspects that you have to look at. You have to look at the question of finding a new CJ and appointing a new CJ, because remember, the CJ is automatically the chairman of the JLSC. All right, so you have that aspect, and then of course you have now the president having to look for the other remaining members of the JLSC, and then of course submitting those names for the approval of both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, and then once there's consensus, then those other names would then be, moved forward as members. So even that process will take some time, because I could tell you in this present scenario, anyone knowing what you are stepping into, because at the end of the day, regardless of who sits as Chief Justice, regardless of who sits as Chairman of the JLSC, regardless of who sits as the other remaining members of the JLSC, the burden now falls on you to find a way forward in this crisis of those 53 cases. That is one of the most damning things there. That plus the question of the status of Miss Mafia Caesar. In other words, is she still a High Court judge? Is she still a magistrate? Is she still Chief Magistrate? Could she have been returned to the magistracy in the circumstances which we are told occurred? Could she have returned as Chief Magistrate and leapfrog now over her other magistrates who would have had legitimate expectations and aspirations to the post of Chief Magistrate? What about the Deputy Chief Magistrate who would have been acting as Chief Magistrate? Could you just now take Ms. Caesar from the judiciary and thrust her back down there as Chief Magistrate, frustrating the aims and legitimate ambitions of those below? So all those problems are still there to be sorted out. So, it's not something that I could see persons rushing forth to put their hands up to say, well, look, I know this is, an ongoing, never-ending crisis, and I am rushing forth to serve and be a part of that mess.
As you mentioned that the Deputy Chief Magistrate certainly is in quite the conundrum, because even if she wanted to deal with those 53 cases that were left outstanding by the former Chief Magistrate, she can't touch them.
Well, that's the thing. And then remember, the DPP himself, if you recall, he appeared and he cautioned her. He actually cautioned her in terms of seeking to move forward, because he said he himself was uncertain as to what is the true status of things.
But I do understand that there was some sort of movement, at least on the part of the DPP, to go through some of those cases to see how far advanced they were, and to determine whether some sort of a speedy conclusion could be brought to them. So some cases are in different stages of progression. And I guess those that would have been close to completion, those are the ones that they would probably want to flag, whenever they decide what they're going to do, they're going to flag those as priority for whomever is going to take them on.
Right, but in terms
without having to go back to the very beginning.
Right, but what I'm saying is any such decision or action would be something that is purely within the province of the DPP, and that would usually be in the circumstance of where they can look at a matter, they could look at the evidence that has gone so far, and maybe they may now be able to be in a position to say, well, look, it doesn't appear that we can prove or establish or sustain this case, so therefore the DPP has the constitutional authority to discontinue proceedings, but that's as far as he can go in terms of his attempting to assist in sorting this out. He can't do anything more than that. He can't direct the chief magistrate or the magistracy as to what they should do or could do. So it's only in terms of a possible withdrawal or discontinuance if it is that he makes that assessment on a case-by-case basis.
So in essence, what he'll be doing...
That is not going to happen in all 53 cases.
So in essence, what he's going to be doing is trying to pull off the docket as many cases as he possibly and reasonably can, and say, well, we're not going to continue with this.
Well, depending on the state of advancement of the matter and the quality of the evidence that has been led. That's a decision he can make. So maybe that's the way he is trying to see if he can assist. But as I said, it's not going to be that for all 53 cases he's going to say, well, we are withdrawing and discontinuing, because that will now create another uproar. So trust me, that is not going to be the solution to this imbroglio.
Martin George, but those people who may probably have their cases dismissed that way or pulled off the docket that way. I'm just thinking of the number of lawsuits that may be coming, as a result of this imbroglio unfolding the way that it has. I mean, people can legitimately sue the state for a miscarriage of justice, can't they?
I anticipate that there will be a flood of litigation arising out of this any which way you take it. That is unavoidable, given the state we've reached. That already is unavoidable. It's just a matter of how much worse it's going to get.
So withdrawal and discontinuance does not necessarily mean is not synonymous with freedom for these guys, these 53 people.
Well, the thing is, it would depend on whether persons have other matters pending for which they are already on remand or, maybe serving a term or whatever. So the thing is, it depends on each circumstance and what are the actual, practical considerations for each individual.
And also one of the other outcomes from this is the way that they choose judges for the High Court is definitely, it will have to be revamped, revised, revisited, reviewed. All of those words.
All of these things are in the mix now. So, you're looking at a major upheaval and overhaul in terms of the processes and the way the JLSC does business. So that's what I'm telling you, it's not something that you would expect to see persons rushing forth to volunteer for this. This is going to be quite a challenging one to in terms of finding the replacements.
And in terms of when someone goes up for that kind of posting, the level of scrutiny that will be directed at them, where do we draw the line between their public persona and doing of a job and their private life? I mean, we must draw a line somewhere.
Well, that's the thing, but the unfortunate reality is that we recognize that the burden of responsibility in such public service is always heavy. Okay, and look at the example of one of the 3 judges that was appointed.
That's what I'm alluding to, yes.
In his public life, nobody has raised any criticism of him, but basically things that he has done privately in terms of the tweets sent out on social media, they are certainly disgusting and appalling, and I see Mr. Martin Daly has raised the issue repeatedly about it, and he's not letting it go, and I think he's quite right, to keep repeating this issue because it certainly raises questions as to, your fitness or suitability to sit or preside in such a capacity because,
And over certain kinds of cases involving women.
That's right. How could persons feel comfortable, appearing before you, wondering, well, are these thoughts that you have expressed publicly, are these the things going through your mind while you're sitting here looking at this witness, giving evidence? It's very, very disconcerting. It's very, very, and quite frankly, I'm not sure I'm hearing enough from the judiciary and the JLSC in relation to that issue. It seems like people are trying to forget that one or ignore that one, but that's something that I consider very, very disturbing.
Right.
I think there's also an independent senator who has a very unfortunate penchant for making some very outrageous and, egregious statements on social media.
Yes.
And I think Ms. Rhoda Barrett has been, on that issue, and I think she's quite right to raise those issues.
Martin George, we're going to leave it there for now, but we appreciate you giving us some time on the Breakfast Roundtable this morning.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And, I look forward to further conversations like this. Thank you and have a great day.
Have a great day, too. And that's it for this first hour of the Breakfast Roundtable. News is next.
This is News on Sky 99.5 FM.